All right, welcome back. We're diving into a really fascinating book today.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, The Angel in the Abyss by J. Daniel Gunther.
Okay, I've heard of this one.
Have you? It's got this really unique approach to spiritual initiation, through the lens of Aleister Crowley's Thelema.
Hmm, interesting. So how does it approach it?
Well, it's all grounded in Jungian psychology.
Hi.
But then it weaves in all these threads from world religions, too. It's really cool.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
I know, right? And it's packed with symbolism.
Sounds like a dense read.
It is. But it's so worth it, even if you think you already know all this stuff.
I can imagine. So what's the plan for this deep dive then?
Well, we're going to try to pull out the key takeaways from the book.
Okay.
See if we can get a good grasp of those thelemic initiation concepts.
Oh,
And then just explore, how Gunther uses symbolism and archetypes to explain how the spiritual transformation actually happens.
awesome. I'm ready.
Great. Well, he kind of throws us right into the deep end, right off the bat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How so?
Jungian ideas. Right away.
Okay.
The collective unconscious, the transcendent function, all that.
Wow, he doesn't mess around.
He doesn't. It's like,
Wow.
buckle up, we're going deep.
Yeah. Well, those are some pretty core Jungian ideas.
They are.
So basically, he's saying we all tap into this, this universal wellspring of symbols, what Jung called the collective unconscious.
Right.
Like a vast library of these archetypes that affect us all.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the transcendent function. This whole process of transformation happens when we confront and then integrate opposing forces within.
Oh, interesting.
So like reconciling our light and shadow sides.
Right.
Like inner alchemy.
Yeah, I like that. Inner alchemy.
Yeah.
So what I find really cool is how Gunther sees Crowley's work, which, let's be honest, can be pretty out there.
Yeah, a little bit.
But he sees it as, resonating with those Jungian ideas.
Wow, that's not what I would have expected.
No.
Yeah.
Especially this whole transformation through opposites thing.
Yeah, it's definitely unexpected. How does he go about exploring that?
He uses the Hebrew letters and the Tree of Life
Oh, cool.
to explore this idea. It adds another layer of complexity,
Definitely. Speaking of layers,
Yeah.
the book frames spiritual initiation as this journey
Okay.
through different eons or eras.
I love that.
Yeah, you've got the Eon of Isis.
Okay.
You got the Eon of Osiris,
Mhm.
and then bam, the Eon of Horus,
Uh-huh. Right.
which he calls the Eon of the Child.
The Eon of the Child. I like that.
It's a whole different vibe, each one.
Yeah, totally.
Each eon marks a huge shift in focus.
Okay.
So the Eon of Isis, which Gunther links to the terrible mother archetype,
Oh, wow.
it was all about blood sacrifice
Mhm.
to appease the goddess. Then you transition to the Eon of Osiris,
Right.
death, burial, resurrection themes.
Okay.
Think ancient Egyptian mythology.
Oh, yeah, like the dying and rising god figure.
Exactly.
Very much focused on the cycle of life and death.
And then we arrive at the Eon of Horus,
Okay.
which is all about this union of opposites,
Okay.
symbolized by the hieroskamos, the sacred marriage,
The sacred marriage? Wow.
and in Thelema, this is that union with the holy guardian angel, which
Yeah.
we'll get into later.
Okay, yeah.
But it's a big one.
Big one. So one recurring motif that stood out to me was this idea of dismemberment
Oh, yeah.
as a symbol for spiritual transformation.
Right.
Sounds intense.
Intense, but not as literal as it might sound at first.
Okay, good.
Not about physically chopping anything up or anything like that.
Okay.
It's more about breaking down the old structures,
Mm-hmm.
old ways of thinking to create something new.
I see.
Think about Lego sets.
Oh, yeah.
Yet, as a kid,
Right.
you had to take apart one creation to build something else.
Oh, I get it. So it's a deconstructing to reconstruct.
Exactly. And he gives all sorts of examples.
Oh, yeah.
Like Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones.
Right.
Shows how this dismemberment symbolizes the dispersal and then the eventual restoration of Israel.
Yeah.
He even makes these parallels to alchemy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and even something as simple as reading.
Uh-huh.
Where we're dismembering a text
Right.
into smaller units to understand it.
Right, to break it down.
Yeah, that can be seen as symbolic dismemberment too. It's everywhere.
Oh, wow, if you know what to look for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Shows these symbolic processes are operating on so many different levels.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
He even brings up the Gnostic texts that talk about incorporating the dismembered flesh of Jesus,
Oh, wow.
which, represents a kind of spiritual assimilation.
Interesting.
Might not be for everyone, but
Right.
shows how this imagery has been used throughout history.
To show transformation.
Yeah, to represent transformation.
Powerful imagery. And speaking of powerful imagery, can we talk about the Hanged Man tarot card for a minute?
Of course.
I think a lot of people, when they see this, figure hanging upside down,
Yeah.
they immediately think punishment, right?
Yeah, it's a common interpretation.
But Gunther, he has a totally different take.
He does. He sees the Hanged Man as the archetype of inversion.
Okay.
It's not about suffering.
Right.
It's about being suspended, seeing the world from this completely different perspective.
So that makes achieving union with the Holy Guardian Angel pretty daunting then, right?
What?
If it's a total upheaval of how you see the world?
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. He doesn't sugarcoat this whole process of spiritual transformation at all.
Right.
And he connects this idea of inversion to the legend of St. Peter being crucified upside down.
Right.
Flipping the traditional crucifixion narrative.
It's like that saying, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it.
Exactly.
You got to flip the perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you need to see things from a different angle.
But how does he connect the Hanged Man to spiritual suspension?
Well, he brings up this thing called the sleep of Siloam, described as this state of lucid sleep filled with pure light imagery.
Wow.
So he suggests that the hangman could represent this state of spiritual suspension that eventually leads to, transformation.
So it's not about suffering then, it's more about surrender.
Right.
Letting go.
Yeah, letting go of that old perspective to make way for the new.
Okay. But how do we actually do that?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And that brings us to another really challenging concept.
Oh, no.
The 50 gates of death.
50 gates of death. Okay. That's a lot.
It is. They're not physical gates, though.
Oh, okay.
It's more of a spiritual process.
Okay.
And it's located in Bina, the sphere of understanding, on the tree of life.
Oh, okay. I'm already overwhelmed.
I know. It's a lot to take in.
50 gates of death.
Well, remember, it's all symbolic. Each gate, challenges our understanding of death. Forces us to confront our deepest fears, our limitations.
So how do we even begin to approach these gates?
That's a good question.
It sounds kind of terrifying.
Well, he uses this symbol called the Peseshkef.
Peseshkef?
It kind of looks like a wishbone.
Okay.
Represents separation and division. So he's saying each gate requires us to separate from something, to let go of an old way of being.
This makes me think about how, as humans, we try to avoid death at all costs.
Right.
Literally and metaphorically.
Right, of course.
Clinging to comfort.
Yeah, to what's familiar.
Exactly. But Gunther's suggesting that actually confronting death, in all its forms, is, essential for growth.
Absolutely. Getting comfortable with discomfort.
Right. That ties into another concept he talks about.
Oh, yeah.
The new covenant of the open way.
Okay.
An eon of the child.
Right. He contrasts this with the Old Testament covenants.
Right, which involved physical acts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Circumcision, blood sacrifice, all that.
Yeah.
The new covenant, it's all about spiritual transformation.
Okay.
Which he says requires complete surrender and sacrifice. But not for, personal gain,
No.
but for service to others. It's a big shift in focus.
That's not about me anymore, it's we.
Exactly.
That's a pretty challenging idea.
Especially in today's world, right?
Yeah, where everything's about, individual gain.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does this new covenant tie into the idea of the Holy Guardian Angel?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Because the Holy Guardian Angel, in Gunther's view, isn't just some, benevolent good fairy.
Right.
It's a transpersonal entity, a true spiritual instructor.
Oh, okay.
And this actually appears in various traditions.
Really? Like what?
Well, you've got Plato's demon
Okay.
and the Golden Dawn's higher self.
Okay, so it's more like a guide, a teacher, who's going to really push you to grow?
Exactly. And it's important to distinguish this from, the Freudian subconscious, the Holy Guardian Angel. It's experienced through the Jungian self.
Okay.
Which is connected to that collective unconscious.
It's a much deeper connection.
Way deeper, way more profound.
Yeah, it's like the universe is saying, I'm not going to spoon feed you. You got to do the work.
Yeah, I like that.
And in Thelema, encountering the Holy Guardian Angel, that's the next step for humankind.
It is. But it requires this profound transformation.
Oh, right.
Which takes us right back to those themes of, death and dismemberment and surrender that we were talking about earlier.
So it sounds like this is where it starts to get really intense.
Oh, it definitely does.
Oh, boy.
But we'll have to delve into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, yeah, we should probably save that for next time.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I have a feeling this is going to get pretty heavy.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up. Ooh. It gets intense. It really does, because before you can even think about encountering the Holy Guardian Angel, you've got to deal with what Gunther calls the four great princes of evil.
Okay, now we're talking about princes of evil.
Yeah.
This is starting to sound like a fantasy novel.
Uh-huh.
But I have a feeling these princes aren't like, the ones with the castles and dragons.
No, not quite.
Right.
Gunther frames these princes as archetypal representations of the shadow forces that can, hold us back from really growing spiritually.
Okay.
And he describes them through the lens of the vision and the voice.
Right.
One of Crowley's key mystical texts.
So not literal princes then,
Yeah,
more like
okay.
symbolic representations of our inner demons.
Exactly.
Like the things that stop us from, embracing real change and growth.
Yeah, the things that keep us playing small.
Right, exactly.
They'll manifest differently for each person.
Of course.
Depending on their background,
Makes sense.
their beliefs, all that. So, for example, for someone who was raised in like a Christian tradition, confronting the shadow might involve facing like the archetype of Satan.
That makes sense. So someone raised in a Buddhist tradition, it might be more about confronting Mara,
Exactly.
the demon who tempted the Buddha.
Precisely. The key is that these princes represent like the forces that tempt us to stay stuck
Okay.
in those old ways of thinking.
Yeah.
The forces that keep us from embracing true spiritual transformation.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the Aeon of Horus being about union.
Yes.
Specifically the Hieros Gamos.
Right.
Isn't there a danger of thinking that union with the Holy Guardian Angel is like all sunshine and roses?
Oh, for sure.
Once you achieve that, all your problems are solved?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's definitely not just merging with this blissful, loving entity.
Oh, right.
It's about confronting your shadow self.
Yeah.
Integrating those darker aspects of yourself.
Oh.
Okay. Remember those princes we were talking about?
Yes.
They're a part of the equation too.
So it's not about becoming like some perfect version of yourself.
No, not at all.
It's about embracing all of yourself, even the parts that are uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about wholeness,
Right.
not just happiness. And that's where the real transformation happens.
Okay.
And Gunther argues that this whole process of confronting the shadow, that's like essential for anyone seeking to, attain the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel.
Yeah, this is all starting to make sense, but it also sounds like incredibly challenging.
It is.
So where do you even begin?
Well, Gunther suggests one of the most important things is cultivating true silence.
Through silence. Okay.
And I don't just mean being quiet externally.
Right.
It's about quieting that constant chatter in your mind,
Yeah.
creating that space
Okay.
for the angel's voice to be heard.
I can see how that would be important, but it's like so much easier said than done, isn't it?
It is, for sure. It's a challenge,
Right.
especially in this world. Everything's so noisy and distracting.
Exactly. Yeah.
True silence can feel almost impossible to achieve.
So it's not about shutting out the world completely.
Right.
It's about finding that stillness.
Exactly. And in that space of deep listening, you might start to perceive,
Right.
the subtle guidance of the Holy Guardian Angel.
But you're not going to hear like a booming voice from the heavens.
Right, exactly. It's much more subtle.
So how do you know if you've made contact?
Yeah, that's the question.
What does that even feel like?
Well, Gunther cautions against expecting, like fireworks,
Right.
dramatic visions.
Okay.
He describes the angel's communication as subtle, more felt than seen. He even uses this phrase,
Yeah.
a kiss from the angel,
Oh, wow.
to describe those like initial encounters.
So it's more about a feeling, an
Yeah.
intuition.
Yes. And those intuitions can manifest in different ways for different people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a sudden flash of insight, or a deep sense of peace,
Right.
or even just a dream that, feels incredibly meaningful.
Okay, but what about those people who say they have constant, like ongoing communication?
Yeah.
I've heard people say that, like they talk to their angel all the time.
Gutter's pretty skeptical of those claims.
He is.
Yeah. He suggests that anyone who's truly in contact with the angel understands, like, the sacredness of that connection.
Right.
And wouldn't just go around talking about it casually.
Mm-hmm.
He compares it to, like, the ancient mystery traditions.
Right, where they were sworn to secrecy
Right.
about all the the deeper teachings and stuff.
Right. So it's not about bragging rights.
Right, right.
Or trying to, like, seek attention. It's about respecting that experience.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So this brings us to a really interesting point that Gunther makes about, like, the nature of the holy guardian angel.
Yeah, and he draws on Carl Jung's work for this one.
Specifically, this concept of the self.
Right. We touched on that earlier. I think I'm starting to grasp how it connects to the holy guardian angel.
Okay.
But it's still a little fuzzy. Can you kind of break that down a bit more?
Sure. So for Jung, the self is like the center of the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this transpersonal archetype that strives for wholeness, integration.
Right.
And it's connected to that collective unconscious.
Right. That vast reservoir of, like, archetypal imagery.
Exactly. But Gunther makes this distinction between the self, lowercase s,
Okay.
which is our personal experience of this archetype, and the self with a capital S, which he equates with the holy guardian angel.
So our personal self, lowercase, is like a gateway
Yeah.
to that larger, like, transpersonal self.
You got it, which is the holy guardian angel.
Right.
Okay.
And in Gunther's view, the angel communicates through this transpersonal self,
Right.
using that language of archetypes and symbols.
So it's not about hearing a literal voice.
No, not at all.
It's more about recognizing the angel's communication through that symbolic language.
Yeah, through the unconscious.
Which is a whole other skill set, right?
It is. It takes deep understanding of yourself,
Right.
your own personal symbology, and how all of that connects to those larger archetypal patterns of the collective unconscious.
This isn't something you, like, learn overnight.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
We're talking years of inner work.
Years of inner work. Okay, so I'm seeing how all of this ties into Gunther's interpretation of thelema.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things he emphasizes is that the holy guardian angel isn't separate from you. You know, it's not this external being that you have to, like, plead with or bargain with.
Right.
It's an aspect of your own deepest self.
It's not about finding the angel then.
No.
It's about realizing that it's already there.
Exactly.
Maybe then.
And that realization, you know, as Gunther suggests, can be one of the most profound, transformative experiences a person can have.
But it requires being willing to really look inward, right?
It does.
Face those shadow parts of ourselves that we'd rather avoid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's really challenging us to step up
Yeah.
and take responsibility for our own spiritual growth.
Right. No more waiting for someone else to save us.
Exactly. And that's a theme that runs through the whole book.
Really?
Yeah. It's not about seeking comfort or reassurance. It's about seeking truth, no matter how challenging it might be.
Yeah, it's definitely a call to action.
No doubt about it.
This isn't spirituality for, like, the passive observer.
Right.
Gunther's saying, like, you got to roll up your sleeves and really do the work.
He is. And it's interesting because it, like, challenges that common idea that, you know, spiritual growth is all about feeling good and finding peace.
Right, right.
He's proposing something way more active.
Yeah.
And honestly.
Confrontational.
Yeah, no pain, no gain, right?
Something like that.
So after this deep dive into the angel and the abyss.
What really sticks with you? What really resonated?
You know, for me, it's this whole idea that spiritual initiation in the eon of the child isn't about waiting for, like, some bolt of enlightenment to strike you down.
Just hit you out of nowhere.
It's about actively choosing to confront your shadow, dismantle those old belief systems, and embrace, like, a whole new way of seeing yourself.
And the world.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much of our spiritual seeking is actually just, like, avoiding the real work.
That's a great point.
Right.
It brings up another thing that Gunther mentions.
Okay.
This isn't about seeking comfort
No.
or reassurance.
Right.
It's about seeking truth.
However challenging.
Even if it's unsettling, even if it's painful.
Yeah, that's where the real growth happens, right?
I think so.
When we're pushed outside those comfort zones.
Yeah,
it's like those 50 gates of death we talked about. Each gate forces you to confront that next level of fear, uncertainty.
You got to push past the limitations to reach a new understanding.
Right.
And that takes real courage.
It does. You know what really struck me?
What's that?
That whole idea of the holy guardian angel.
Yeah.
Not as, like, this external savior figure.
Right.
But as an aspect of our own deepest self.
It shifts the whole paradigm.
Totally. It's about reclaiming our own spiritual authority.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we have the potential to connect with, like, the divine directly.
Without any intermediary.
Exactly. We don't need permission.
It's like we become our own hierophants.
Yeah, like that.
But that requires like a level of self-awareness and honesty that I think a lot of people might shy away from.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
No.
But like Gunther says, the rewards,
Yeah.
they're immeasurable.
They are, yeah.
And it all starts with that willingness to look inward.
To face our shadows.
Yeah.
Embrace that transformative power of the aeon of the child.
Well said. So to our listeners,
Yeah.
after this deep dive, what image or idea from the angel in the abyss really stands out to you?
Right.
How might these concepts apply to your own life, your own spiritual journey?
That's the question.
Take some time to reflect on that.
Yeah.
And if you're intrigued and you want to explore this further,
definitely
check out the book.
It's worth it.
It's dense.
It is.
But it's worth the effort.
Absolutely.
And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.